motivation or the experience or the realization that I'm one of his. And it's called suffering. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. Now, almost back to the text. For I reckon, Paul says, for I reckon that the suffering of this present time is not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. Amen. All right. So he talks about we're glorified with him, we suffer with him. So then he says, let's talk about this because it brings us back to the root point. So he says, I reckon. And that's not like how I use I reckon. Graham says, are we going to do this, that, or the other when you get off of work today? And you know how I'll reply? I reckon. And what that really means is, well, I don't really want to. But if I feel bad enough, because I might have said I was going to, I might do it. But then again, I might not. That's how I use reckon. That's not how Paul uses reckon. You know how Paul uses reckon? You go back to the 4th chapter of the book of Romans. Abraham believed God, and it was imputed to him or reckoned to him for righteousness. That's how Paul uses reckon. You know what that means? It's an accounting term, right? It's to go down through the numbers and see how everything adds up and whether or not it adds up right or it adds up wrong. Paul says, I've done the math, and here's where I've arrived. I reckon. So it's not a guess. It's not a haphazard term, but he says, I've done my research, and here's where I've come to. That I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared. There's another accounting term. To the glory which shall be revealed in us. So what is he saying? Well, I think one of the most obvious companion texts to Romans chapter 8, verse 18, is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16, 17, and 18. So let's go 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. All right? For our light affliction, which is but for a moment. Right. Now, I don't know about you, but when afflictions come on me, number one, I don't really look at them from an outward perspective as something that's light, and the Apostle Paul's moment must be a lot longer than what I think a moment is. That's how, that's how I am. I'm just confessing. When afflictions come, first thing I think is, when are these going to end? And it never seems like they end when I think they should end, because number one, I think perhaps they shouldn't have started to begin with, and now I'm in the midst of them, and they're not ending the way I think they should end. Yeah. But the Apostle Paul says, our light affliction, which is but for a moment. And that light, in the luminous version of light, it means lightweight. It means easy. The second to the last song we sang was from the 11th chapter of the book of Matthew, right? Jesus Christ says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly at heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Our light affliction, which is but for a moment. It's something that's light. It's something that's not. It's an affliction. It's weighty. We go through it. Don't get me wrong. The experiences of life are difficult, to say the least, from time to time. The afflictions that we go through in our life are real. They're personal. The experience that we have in those is, though it's varying from person to person, I would consider that perhaps it's not varying in this light, that you're like me and you want them done and that moment to pass. But watch what Paul says. Watch what Paul says. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh. So, affliction isn't just to afflict. The Affliction is something that works something. And that worketh means it's constantly working. It's constantly doing something. So what is it doing? Worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight. Now here's something that's heavy. Light affliction, eternal weight of glory. So the light afflictions that we go through, they're working in us something. What is that? They're starting to put a weight on us, a burden, if you will, on us, for that exceeding glory that'll be revealed, just like the Apostle Paul says, when he says, I reckon the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. So it works in us, this light affliction, from moment to moment, from time to time, from affliction to affliction. It works in us. So many examples. What the prime example I can think of is the son who left his father's house with his inheritance and squandered it on riotous living, the Bible says. And then something happened while he was out feigning to fill his belly with the husk that he fed the swine with, and he came to himself. That light affliction worked in him. It worked in him from the time he asked his father, give me what's coming to me, and from that point till he walked out of the house, went down the road, spent his money in any way that he thought was suitable to spend, and then realized where he was. You know what was happening while that light affliction was taking place? It was working in him a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Our light affliction doesn't elevate our status in heaven and immortal glory, but it places that weight on us, and the soul feels the weight, and the desire then becomes to be rid of this body of flesh and enter into heaven's pure world. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in the 5th chapter of the book of Romans. In the 5th chapter of the book of Romans. He says, and not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience. There's that word again. Tribulation worketh patience. That's a hard lesson to understand, and not understand, it's a hard lesson to grasp or to put in motion. Tribulation worketh patience. But it's true. It's true. Now, y'all can believe me or not. But I believe that at my age now, the ripe young age that we're at, I have more patience than I did 40 years ago. All right, nobody said anything, so that's good. I've got more patience now than I did 40 years ago. Why is that? I didn't just develop it. I didn't just say, okay, I'm going to be more patient. Because I tell you, I've still got a lot of impatience in me. How did that happen? Tribulation worketh patience. Brother Derek, there's a burden in me. And that weight, we don't ever meet the maximum weight of that weight of glory. It always builds and builds and builds. Tribulation worketh patience in us. But he doesn't stop there. Then he says, and patience, experience, which you could attribute to wisdom by understanding the things that we go through in life. Because you know what I say, the dreaded question is that we should never ask, why me? It's a dreaded question we should never ask. You know how we learn not to ask that question? You know how I've learned not to ask that question? Tribulation work patience, and patience experience. But then the big key that opens every door. What does experience work? Hope. Now 2 Corinthians chapter 4 begins to come into a brighter light. That weight of glory that begins to weigh on us, I believe, from the time that we are born again unto the time that we pass from this life. that weight grows heavier and heavier as we go. All right, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creature. Now he introduces a new word, creature. The earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. Now, by creature, I believe he is specifically calling out the born-again child of God. All right? He's not talking about beasts. He's not talking about things that are meaningless in life, but he says, for the earnest expectation, earnest expectation, remember that. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. So the creature has something Paul calls the earnest expectation. And that waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. Patience, experience hope. In fact, Paul uses this, I think, in the book of Philippians, my earnest expectation and my hope. I can't remember how that goes. That according to my earnest expectation and my hope, I might magnify the Lord Jesus Christ, whether it be by my life or by my death. There it is. My earnest expectation and my hope. Hope is the embodiment of the earnest expectation. The earnest expectation is what lays the weight on us. It's what weighs us down. But when I say that, I'm not saying that in the negative. I'm saying it in the positive. And again, you think, that doesn't make sense. I don't like being weighed down. I don't like carrying heavy stuff. Let me tell you something. When the earnest expectation, moved by that hope, is weighing you down, it moves within you to the point that your desire is no longer of things in this life, but your desire becomes heaven, heaven itself, and to see the Lord Jesus Christ with your own eyes. That's what that weight does. That's what the experience is of the earnest expectation. And it says the earnest expectation of the creature, the child of God, born-again child of God. Remember, this is in the here and the now. There is therefore now no condemnation. Therefore, we are, what does he say? That we are the children of God. This is the here and the now. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. That's waiting. There's the wait. Now, I know that's waiting is a different word, but in that waiting, the weight bears down on us. Now, our text only took 30 minutes to get there. But I hope you see the importance of understanding, number one, that this is the here and the now and the born-again child of God. And number two, that there is a actionable hope within the child of God called the earnest expectation. Then he says, for the creature, now he doesn't change context. He's not switching over to something else right in the middle of this thought. He's still maintaining the same context and the same thought that he started with. The creature in verse 19, it's the same creature in verse 20. And what is that? It's the born-again child of God. For the creature was made subject to vanity. The creature was made subject to vanity. Well, what does that mean? Romans chapter 7. When we're born again, Paul says our outward man perish. In the 7th chapter, he talks about flesh against the spirit, spirit against the flesh. When we're born again, it's not some magical experience that happens that completely obliterates our sin in the body. The Apostle John's very clear about that in his first epistle. But we also don't believe in something like, well, the Spirit runs through us and then leaves us alone. It marks us as a child of God, but that's all it does, and we don't have the indwelling Spirit. That's heresy. That goes against every precept of what being born again means. So just like being born again doesn't change this flesh into something miraculous and sinless, nor does being born again mean the Spirit just rushes through us and leaves us. But what it means is the very Spirit of the Son of God takes up residence within our cleansed, redeemed, atoned for soul, and there it dwells until death comes or the Lord comes again. Now, we're supposed to do what we should, what Paul calls mortify our members, or mortify, that's in Colossians, mortify the deeds of the flesh, which is 6th chapter of the book of Romans. But does it start making sense now, this light affliction, the sufferings not worthy to be compared, the things that we go through and experience, the very soul that we have within us that has been filled by the holy presence of the Son of God has been made prisoner in the body of this flesh. That's what the creature was made subject to vanity, or being made a subject, or to be made a prisoner. Let me tell you, our life experience shows time and again that the human body is built to do everything to prevent death to happen. It is. It is. We watch our loved ones progress in this, and yet the body continues to fight. It's both. It's a natural thing of life. But the soul. The soul is ready to be freed from his prison. The soul's not going to fight to stay. The soul's ready to go. And the prison bars that contain it, it was made subject to vanity, subject to sin, subject to nothingness. That's where it's encased, right here and now. You know, another way to know or to realize that we're a child of God is when you sit in the pew and sing songs of praise, and then out of nowhere, it seems like, the words of a song hit you like a ton of bricks. Talk about weight. And tears well up, and my heart rate will increase. And my heart rate increases because my very soul that is in constant communication with God through my intercessor, Jesus Christ, says that's where we're headed. That's where we're going. And the tribulation that we have in this life is meaningless compared to this right here. And that tells me that I'm one of his. Or when the preacher gets up and he preaches in power and demonstration of the Spirit, and it goes beyond what you hear in your natural ears, and it begins to touch your heart. And by heart, I mean the soul. And I put it this way before. Sometimes it's as if my very soul is squirming and moving and pressing outward to say, let me go. Let me go. And in those situations, even subduing my carnal nature, in my mind, I think, Let me go and let's go. Let's go. It's evidence of being a child of grace right here and right now. But the creature was made subject to vanity. Then he says, not willingly, right? God commands and it's done. He sends his spirit and it's done. But then there's a great three-letter word that comes after that. The creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him. Who's the him? I believe that's God. Who hath subjected, we got double prison. Prisoner encased in this tomb of flesh, but by reason of him that hath subjected the same in hope. Prisoner of the flesh. I believe, and I got a verse that'll back me up, prisoner of the flesh, but at the same time, prisoners of hope. Prisoners of hope. Is that in Zechariah? I think that's in Zechariah. Turn ye to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Prisoner of hope. You know, the creature was made a prisoner of vanity because it's encased in this body. But God didn't just encase it in this body to be held prisoner for all time. But God subjected or put in prison the very same thing. But that prison was a prison of hope. I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, and I'll be really interested to know Brother Clifford's thought. But in the 4th chapter of the book of Ephesians, I look at this quite differently than the way, say, John Gill does, or I guess several of the commentators. I don't remember what verse, but it's in the 4th chapter of the book of Ephesians. And it says, wherefore he saith, when he ascended upon high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. John Gill says he led sin captive. I don't know if I like that. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't like that. So I thought, well, what is Paul talking about? When he ascended upon high, he led captivity captive. And I'm thinking, well, when he ascended on high, that was a really good thing, right? The Psalms declares it. Open the doors, O ye heavens, open ye gates, and the King of glory. I mean, that ascending on high was that's when I believe, as Paul says, he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. So it sounds like a good thing, right? So I'm thinking, what does that mean? Well, back up to the first verse, context, and I believe the Apostle Paul gives us a clue. I beseech ye therefore, as the prisoner of the Lord, that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. So Paul starts out this 4th chapter of Ephesians by saying he's a prisoner. And not just that, he's a prisoner of the Lord. So I submit, if he's a prisoner and he's a prisoner of the Lord, then he must be one of the ones who is a prisoner of hope. And when he gets down to verse 8, 9, whatever verse that is, and he says, wherefore he saith, when he ascended upon high, he led captivity captive. I believe he led every prisoner that had been bound by sin, that had been squashed by sin, that the devil himself saying, you're going to die and it'll all be over with, and there'll be nothing after that, that he took captivity captivity, and I believe that captivity was something that was established in the everlasting covenant before the world began, when God chose out a people in his Son, Jesus Christ. I believe in covenant form, he enwrapped his arms around every last one of us, and we became his subject, or rather, his prisoner. But brothers and sisters, that's the prison that I want to be in. And I believe when Jesus Christ went to the cross, as he must needs, now is my time come, he says. What shall I say to my Father? Save me from this hour, but for this hour came I into the world. I believe when he went to the cross, that just as God had wrapped his arms around every child of grace in covenant before the world began, I believe Jesus Christ wrapped his arm around every child of grace as he atoned for every sin of every child of grace. As he was made to be the sin bearer, as he was made to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. And when he said, "It is finished, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit," I believe, still wrapped in the arms of our Lord Jesus Christ, into heaven he went with the prisoners of hope, if you will. And I believe that just as the covenant work and the legal work is made represented in the vital work of the born-again child of God, I believe the captivity is just as vital for us today. I believe that you and I are in the grand prison as prisoners of hope. I like to think that this very soul that God has cleansed from above with the blood of Christ and placed his spirit within us is a prisoner of vanity, and it is. But God said, I'm not leaving them as prisoners of vanity. I'm going to subject them, or otherwise, while they're prisoners of vanity, they'll also be prisoners of hope. And I like how Zechariah says, "Turn ye to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope." Turn ye to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Brothers and sisters, when God above subjected that inward man to vanity, aren't you glad that at the same time that he was already subjected, or he was already had been made a prisoner of hope? A prisoner of hope. I'll tell you what, that's something that we should cling to in this life. It's what makes afflictions light. It's what makes us reckon or come to the conclusion based on evidence that the suffering we experience in this life isn't worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. I'm glad I'm a prisoner of hope, that even in the darkest hours of night that you might experience, even the darkest times of your life, even the point in time, perhaps like Peter was, who felt like he had no hope, that you might hear with realization that hope lives within you, and because hope lives within you, you have been made a prisoner of hope. I said this at Farmersville a couple of years ago about Abraham in the 4th chapter of the book of Romans. How Abraham, it says, he who against hope believed in hope. If we're prisoners of hope, it doesn't mean that we don't have to apply that hope, but we should take that hope of which we're prisoners and be like Abraham, and we lean into our hope in this life. When the afflictions come, when the sufferings of this present time seem to overwhelm us, that we don't lean into anything of our own selves, that we don't lean into this vanity that the creature's been made subject to, but that we do like Abraham, and we lean into that hope. And as we press into that hope, our afflictions become light. It may not change your circumstance. Your circumstance may be exactly what it is. But I'm telling you what, it'll change the outlook of your circumstance by thinking, this is only for a moment. This is only in this present time that I suffer these things. But I have been made a prisoner of hope by the same one who died for me on Calvary's tree, and by the same one who foreknew me before the world was. And no matter what may be happening, I have this realization in me. This light affliction is but for a moment. And then when that light affliction passes from you, you know what it's done? It's added to the weight that you bear within your inward man of the glory that'll be revealed. It adds to the weight. It increases that burden. If you look up that word weight in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, that word is only used 6 times in the New Testament. Weight is the only time. That word there in that verse is the only time it's translated as weight. All other 5 times, you know what it's translated as? A burden. And a burden isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes we have burdens in life that we must undergo. That's why Paul said, bear ye one another's burden and so fulfill the law of Christ. But we have times when God lays a burden on us. And I believe that burden is added to the weight of glory that he talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and that he talks about in Romans chapter 8. To make the realization that the suffering of this present time are not worthy to be compared. Why? Because it's adding to that weight. It's adding to that burden that's laid on us. And that's a good thing, brothers and sisters, because it helps us to realize that this world is not our home. And that our prison walls of this clay will be dissolved at some point in death. Or when the Lord comes again and he changes our vile bodies to fashion them like unto his glorious body. But until then, we're not just subjected as prisoners to these prison walls of clay, but we're made prisoners of hope. And when you're made a prisoner of hope, you're bound to that, brothers and sisters. May God give us grace to continue to be bound to that hope that wells up within us. I used to say that wells up within us from time to time, but you know what? I've changed my mind on that. I believe it's constantly welling up within us. It's constantly hoping. There never comes a time when I found myself to be without hope. I may have been without any and everything else in this life. But when it came to my hope, Brother Steve, I realized that this world is not my home. Heaven's my home, and my hope is anchored, as Paul says in Hebrews chapter 6, in heaven and immortal glory itself. And I like it when it says, when God made promise to Abraham because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. That's where my hope is anchored. It's not anchored in Abraham. It's not anchored in Mark. It's not anchored in anyone else in this life. My hope is anchored in the very one who speaks and it's done. The very one whose will be as it is spoken. The one whose purpose is turned toward every child of grace. He's made all of us prisoners of hope, and we have that to cling to in this life. And Paul says, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and entereth into that within the veil. There's our hope. There's our all. That's everything. That's everything in life. That's everything that life should be. We enjoy the times in our lives that we experience. We enjoy watching our children grow up and maybe have a little bit of panic at how fast they're growing up. But we joy in that. We joy in our grandkids. We joy in one another. We joy in the fellowship of the saints. But I tell you this, I'm ready for the time where the joy doesn't end. I'm ready for the time when this world is no more. Right. And that we'll see him as he is. Then our hope will be fulfilled. We'll be released from the prison bars of this clay, of this sinful flesh. We'll be released from the prisoner of vanity. And yes, we'll be released from the prison of hope. Well, what do we have then? Then we stand before him all together, proclaiming, worthy is the Lamb. Proclaiming that he is the one that we sought for all of our lives, the one that we longed for all of our days, and the one that we look to in our darkest hours. He is the one. We've hoped for that, and then we'll see it. No more need for hope. Hope will end. But brothers and sisters, in this life, I submit to you that hope is everything. May He richly bless and keep you is my prayer. We'll sing a song and extend the privilege of this church. If your desire is to unite with this church, come let us know. After the first verse, we'll extend the right hand of fellowship. 4:13.